This podcast is brought to you by FlexiSpot. Use code YTE7P50 for $50 off their E7 Pro standing desk through the link in the description. And also check out the link below to look at their auto incline walking treadmill. And it is also brought to you by Mint Mobile. Get 50% off their 12-month unlimited plan right now through the link in the description. We'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by someone who I believe it is the third time that they've been on. But if you haven't seen those episodes, I do recommend you check them out as well. Please, guest, introduce yourself, tell people who you are, and what you cover on the YouTube channel, Asianometry.
Hi, I'm John, and I run the Asianometry YouTube channel. Most of my work is covering, stuff about. It started out as episodes of Asian history, moved into silicon, semiconductor technology, and a little bit of Europe as well. But mostly, I would say it's like technology history with touch of Asian perspective.
Now, did that happen? Because I have seen some of your older videos, kind of just going into really, really deep older history of multiple parts of Asia. But over time, did it become unavoidable that you just started talking about tech more and more? Was it an interest? It had to be partially an interest thing, but was it mostly that, or it just all started turning into technology talk?
Oh, I think it's kind of like if you're in Taiwan, you can't really avoid TSMC. Yeah. And it's basically, especially if you're outside of Taipei, if you're outside of Taipei, TSMC is basically the 800-pound gorilla that you can't avoid talking about. So I covered them pretty early on when I started talking about, Asian companies and stuff like that. And then, they got a little bit more prominent. And my family is in the semiconductor industry design. So I basically, sort of ported itself over to me. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were already talking about it. So I imagine just those conversations with them alone led to wanting to cover what's going on there. I mean, I have to bring this up. The last time you were on, the first thing we talked about for a long while there was an earthquake in Taiwan. Of course, this shot fear across the world as everyone's obviously a lot of people wanted to make sure people were okay, but a lot of people were like, can I get my iPhone still? And I'm just curious, what has the recovery been in Taiwan for that earthquake? And there's some people drastically worried about what would happen, but it seems like Taiwan and TSMC kept functioning without a hitch.
Yeah, it was with a lot of work, and I think people really, I spoke to someone who was involved with that, and it's just a lot of effort on part of the operators, the technicians, the equipment engineers. As soon as the earthquake happened, they all dropped their whatever they were doing, and they came to the fab. Once the fab was checked out to be okay, they went in and they basically, all the equipment's frozen, right? So they have to go into the equipment, find out where each wafer is within this kind of process and process step, check whether the wafer's okay, whether there's any problems, and then kind of move from there to get the equipment restarted. So I think they were 80% back on track within 24 hours, or maybe it was 2 or 3 days. I guess the main question was there were a series of more serious aftershocks, 4.5s, 5s, and those made it a little bit more challenging because, stop and start. So, for the people of TSMC, it was a lot of effort, a lot of long nights. But, since then, it's been pretty good, at least for the company. Hualien, which is on the other side of the island, they're having a pretty rough time. But, I feel for them.
Mm. Well, I guess you're somewhat answering what my next question was going to be. But, I just, I don't live there. I don't know what it looks like. How do you see reminders of the earthquake day to day? like going around town or something? Or
Oh no, no, no. I meant in the sense that the tourism is pretty terrible
oh,
because
okay.
Hualien is. They've had two or three more pretty serious earthquakes since then, and it's been tougher for a lot of people. I guess been scared away. They don't really want to go there, which is terrible because Hualien's an amazing place. I highly recommend people go visit. Great food, amazing views and all that. You won't believe you're on the same island.
Mm. All right, let me you touched on like this wasn't something I planned to bring up, but you touched on like making sure like what's the status of the wafers? Is the quality still there if we start production? Did you follow that Intel oxidation issue that happened last year? Because I thought that was an excellent example of the quality control not being kept up. If you missed it, Intel's gone through, I'm sure you haven't missed this, a whole flurry of manufacturing and quality control issues over the past few years, especially with Raptor Lake. And I was told Sapphire Rapids was affected by some of this as well. But like it wasn't just like there seemed to be an issue with the design. It seemed like there was like the HVAC system, I think in their Arizona fabs, if I'm remembering correctly, or one of them, like just wasn't functioning properly. They realized it like, I don't know, months after there were issues, and then realized that there were all of these problems. So there are multiple reasons their chips weren't functioning. And from what I hear, they still massive failure rates right now, by the way. Just no one talks about it anymore for some reason. But I wonder if you had any thoughts on the oxidation aspect of it, like the HVAC failure, not realizing it right away, making the decision of which wafers to sell. Seems like some of them were affected that they decided to sell.
I think it's kind of like it's that when a situation like that happens, it's such a it's like a failure, I would say, of processes where and you really don't know what's going on with these wafers when they go through the equipment. There's 800 steps, maybe 1,000 steps now, and you have to constantly make sure that the steps are being done correctly. You have to use these metrology tools that have to work at very high volume and all that to make sure that there's no game breaking flaw. And I think what it's really a culture within a company to kind of track down and find exactly when a wafer fails, why, and using that to, avoid future failures. And I think I'm never quite sure what's going on within Intel, and I don't think Intel knows what's going on inside Intel. But
Mm.
within TSMC, there is a extreme, almost. I don't even. They say that their wafer is their child, and one of your child has died, and you don't know why. Go find out why. And I
Hmm.
think like they have a maniacal tendency to go further than anyone else.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because it just feels like, and I watched your Intel Reign of Terror video recently, which on the one hand goes into like why Intel was such a, in many ways, unfair juggernaut. But at the same time, you can see these quotes from some of them that seems very aggressive. Like, we care about this. We have to get this perfect. We have to do that. Like, there was this heart in their ruthlessness, I think, that I feel like they've lost. Because what am, I'll be honest, I some of my information I got when I leaked details about Raptor Lake failures came from people who worked at some of these founders. I guess I'll just say that now. And the picture I got painted was like a revolving door of middle managers that are just kind of clocking in 9 to 5, which, work life balance to a degree, that's okay. But like, didn't really seem to think it mattered if they went above and beyond. And if something failed, they'll go, well, what do I, and underline this word, what do I have to do today to make
Mm.
sure I've done my job? And then they just clock out. And then they'd be there for like 2 months, leave, new manager. I feel like that loss of like heart and gumption and like having like just like the historical knowledge of working at one fab as a manager for 10 years straight, for example, is like you like leads to just not really caring about the process, right?
Yeah, I think that's, but you can say that for almost anything. A
Sure.
guy, if you're trying to achieve like at a kind of a normal company level, you go to a normal company and you get paid a normal salary and you do your normal work. I think if you want to work at a company that used to be the third most profitable company in the Fortune 500, you need to be like you need to be cracked, as the Gen Z kids say now. You need to be really, really, really good and world leading, right? And the world's harder to compete in now. And I think that
Hmm.
requires a dedication that people, I think maybe a lot of, I mean, most people will rightly so believe not to be in their wheelhouse.
All right, so Transpose 1195 writes, and it says, as foundries ramp production lines in new geographies, what approaches do they take to ensure new fabs perform as well as the R&D line at the headquarters? Does TSMC have any advantages or challenges here? Until often touted, copy exactly, but maybe that's just pithy marketing.
I don't think it's marketing. I think they actually do adhere to that. Um, the way TSMC ramps up, you know, mass manufacturing in a new geography is not actually that different from Intel. There is a team of core R&D people who
Hmm.
are absolutely, they know absolutely the whole node left from beginning to end. They go in and they tune the equipment to a certain settings, and then they tell like one set of lines within the fab, a new fab, and then they will tell the rest of the, you know, equipment people within the fab, say, make all of the other tools exactly like this tool setting. So they will, that's basically what it is. And that's the approach that, um, if it doesn't work like the way it should, then they go even harder to try to find out. It needs to be precisely exactly like that single R&D tool, the golden standard. There's like a golden standard. It
Hmm.
can perform better, it can perform worse. Well, if it performs, it won't, but it's guaranteed to perform at least that standard. So TSMC doesn't necessarily have any advantage or challenge regarding that sort of process. I mean, it's borrowed from Intel. I would say maybe the interesting thing is what comes after, which is where when the tool is working exactly as it, the golden standard, then then they start tweaking. They start tweaking to make it maybe run cheaper, right?
Mm.
Maybe they to make it try to run faster, improve the yield, stuff like that. A lot of that happens on production, which is interesting.
Right, and that can lead to some discrepancies between fabs or something because of that.
True. Yeah.
So I want to ask this then. The first major subject I want to get to, I guess after talking about the earthquakes a bit, was TSMC manufacturing in the US. So we already have AMD 4 nanometer chips apparently being made in Arizona. Although supposedly they cost more to make in the US compared to Taiwan, although that isn't surprising. This is not the same manufacturing base that is the gold standard of silicon that is Taiwan. But how do you expect companies like AMD to balance this newfound ability to manufacture in the US versus Taiwan? And do you think eventually the Taiwanese government will okay the latest nodes to be run in the US? Because I see this back and forth. I would suspect the best you would get was like, say, 1.6 nanometer or whatever, starts in Taiwan first, and then maybe a year later it comes to the US. Or do you not think that, or do you not think that's going to happen? Because there's been some like hints maybe they'll be a little more open to that. Like, how do you see companies like AMD, especially balancing the manufacturing in two areas, or two regions with TSMC? And do you think TSMC is going to continue to be more lenient over time on how cutting edge a foundry can be outside of Taiwan?
I think there's two questions. So let me separate. Let
Hmm.
me do the second one first. I think the Taiwanese government will okay the latest nodes to run the US. I think what a lot of people miss is that literally the maturation of a leading edge node cannot be done like 5,000 mile or wherever the Pacific Ocean is, however wide it is, in between the R&D node and the R&D fab and the US fab, right? I would say it needs to be very, very close. And it takes like 1 or 2 years to get that node from
Mm.
R&D to high volume. So it's just literally a technical thing. They cannot get it done it won't be profitable if they just took that thing way too early and they just sent it to the United States, or any other place, Japan or Europe or something like that. And I think we need to at least appreciate that we're manipulating atoms here, and
Hmm.
we need to be clear that like this is extremely utterly difficult. Now, the second thing, your first question is like balancing this newfound ability. I think in the future, what you're going to find is that the cost difference between manufacturing in Taiwan and the United States is going to narrow
Hmm.
because if you think about it, a lot of these, where is the difference in cost coming from? It's not necessarily labor because labor is like less than 25% or maybe even 20% of the total cost of the fab and operating it. It's There's energy cost, but people
Yeah.
have said that America's energy cost is going to be way cheaper than in Taiwan because Taiwan's energy costs are going nutso right now. Um, then
Hmm.
where is it? It's the supply chain, and a lot of the supply chain is right now in the process of moving from Taiwan to more to United States. It's a slow process because these guys don't have the budget, or they're clearly not as they're good, but they're clearly not as crazy as TSMC. And so it's going to be a longer process, and over the time, you're going to find that will happen. Once that happens, you will see the cost difference close, and I think it will become a lot more amenable to companies like AMD to say, well, yeah, let's do a lot more US stuff because you're going to have advantages of you get to not just, I would say, public relations, but eventually there might be some advantages in design feedback. You'll get more information. Who knows? Like the opportunities are presented are intriguing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess what I'd bring up first from what you said is like it's just going to take time to build up the knowledge base, right? But as the knowledge base becomes more adept in the US, they will figure out how to do things for the same price that's been done in Taiwan. Even if they don't quite get there on that level, the energy cost advantage over time, it's going to take time. It's probably going to balance out to a similar cost over time, you think?
I agree. I think it's definitely in the works, and I think they will. I think the energy cost is a very significant portion, and it's getting very expensive in Taiwan. So it's not necessarily the cost gap might not be closed in the way that we all
Hmm.
kind of hoped it would be. It would be more like Taiwan getting way more expensive and the United States kind of staying where it is.
Mm.
But like, we shall, you know, the gap will be closing.
And just to make sure I understand correctly, it sounds like you think that, sure, Taiwan's going to, okay, make 1.6 nanometer right now in the US if you want to. But if they do so, that is with the knowledge that, like, well, the base, as you say, golden standard version of a process is going to be in Taiwan anyways, and that's going to take years to come to the US every time or anywhere else they build it. Anyways, and so there's probably always going to be at least a 6 to 12-month gap if not longer where any truly cutting edge node that comes out of TSMC is, they're still going to have a 6 to 12 month at least lead because of that reason, right?
I think, like, to clarify, kind of to hone it a little bit more, I would say it's like a cutting edge node. If you import it way too early, it's like a very green banana. Like, no
Mhm.
one's going to want to eat that. It's going to suck. And I think, like, you want to port over a node that is mature, right? That has maybe 70, 80% yield, and it's good and it's profitable. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun. And, like, it's not going to be economical to anyone, and especially TSMC. I think, yeah, it takes maybe 1 or 2 years or 6 months to maybe a year
Mhm.
for these nodes to get more mature, and then yeah, there'll be another node right behind it. So it's fun, and it's going to be it's you need to don't rush the process and the technical process of getting these things to be economical because, like, as I say, this we're manipulating atoms here.
Clean Sweep writes in, do you see any signs that there's progress towards building out non-silicon or packaging parts of the PC mobile hardware supply chains outside of Taiwan?
I think a lot of these packaging sites are actually not in Taiwan at all, with the exception of like the high end advanced
Sure.
packaging stuff. A lot of these are in like Malaysia or like the Philippines or something like that. I would say is there progress towards that? I say if you look at traditional packaging where it's like, a bunch of epoxy, bonding wires and all that, probably no.
Hmm.
But like if you're thinking CoWoS and stuff like that, you'll get some of the middle or kind of older stuff. Like I'd say whatever's being used to package like iPhone chips, that's probably going to the United States. Um, in terms of like the absolute advanced, like newest advanced packaging, which is like for Nvidia, whatever, those will take more time because that technology is right now also being matured. Because I think it really caught TSMC off guard that it's become so prominent, and they're really trying to catch up. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of fat, I guess, to be developed out of that situation.
So
That makes sense.
yeah, and I recently had Daniel Nenny on of semiwiki.com, and like his opinion was it's gonna, whether it's heat sinks and like whatever else is in the assembly process of a PC, that is gonna come to the US and it has to happen, from his perspective, American, of course. Um, but that will take decades. And you know what? Look, yep, it's gonna take decades, but that is gonna probably develop further and further. I mean, I assume you somewhat agree as well that that will continue to be diversified around the world. Like as countries realize we can't just like build everything in one place, right?
Well, the one place is China, I think is a lot more
Yes.
difficult because China is getting a lot better at this stuff as well.
And it sounds silly, like how hard is it to put a heat sink on something? And it's like, yeah, but if they're 10% better, it's 10% cheaper, 10% less defects. That makes it 20% cheaper. Like there are like they are, because they are doing all of it practically, they are actually a lot better at it and better at doing it without having to hire a bunch of experts to figure out little things that go wrong.
Yeah, and I think like I'm it terrifies me to say this, but I think the Chinese manufacturers are going to get out even way better in the
Mm,
future because there's so many. This is just my head canon. Not like I have any
sure.
like real data backing this, but I know that this the percentage of STEM graduates within China is like going to surge in the coming years just because you got a lot of them entering school and such, and you're going to have this massive army of like ultra cheap engineering labor
Right.
to just
Which
throw.
is perfect for that type of low tech, manufacturing.
Yeah, and you can throw at some situation like like you can find the smallest thing that in America or any other place, Europe or anywhere, you wouldn't bother to throw an engineer at, but you can pull together a team and say, "Hey, this like this tiny bit of this heat sink, fix that. Find some
Hmm.
brilliant idea to fix it." And I think you know, that's what China's going to be really good at, and I think that's what I think is going to that is the challenge that uh, Western and all types of manufacturing outside of China is going to have to encounter in the coming years.
Hmm. Like making sure that it's like in the United States, for example, we promote, sure, if you want to get a PhD, in nuclear engineering, go for it. But making sure we have 2-year degrees and we're pushing people towards base level engineering degrees quicker and in higher numbers to be able to compete.
Yeah, and get people just more, you know, I say one of my secondary goals of the channel is to psyop people into wanting to do engineering and stuff like that. And I think I think that's clear. It's just important to people. And I think um it's I think it's important that a lot of our young people want to do that sort of thing and not necessarily mm, to have that base for our future.
Kiln God writes in and says, do you think AMD bought a lot of wafer capacity at TSMC Arizona already? Like they're already making some, but do you think AMD is buying enough and doing enough in the US to put a made in the USA sticker on RDNA 4 graphics cards this month? Also, I assume coolers and assembly will be overseas too. Any rumors to the contrary? And that's another thing I'm curious that you think about too. Like when they I'm assuming they're like making Zen 4. I mean Zen, well, maybe, but probably Zen 5 in Arizona right now. And because it's just 1 4 nanometer monolithic die, maybe RDNA 4 graphics cards as well. But like, do you think, all right, so here's the die on the package, or like on the, I forgot what it's called, but other than shipping it out of the US and finishing the production of the graphics card with its cooler, or do you think they ship the coolers into Arizona and are doing it there? Or how do you think that's working?
I honestly have no insight in that. I would say it would be a pretty bad PR look. Like you spend all this money to make a chip in TSMC Arizona, and then it still gets stamped made
Just
in
sent to the
Malaysia.
Philippines or
Yeah,
some Malaysia. Yeah.
packaged in Malaysia, made in Taiwan or something, or made in China or something. I think that would still be that would be detrimental to the intended goal. I'm sure they'll figure out some way to make it to have like a made in the USA stamp in it somewhere. There was the value makeup of the overall package or something. They'll figure something out.
It's funny, and I guess AMD is technically an American company as well, so it shouldn't be weird, but it will be funny because Intel Arrow Lake uses 3 nanometer, so they have to get that, at least right now, from Taiwan. It would be hilarious if you have AMD putting "Made in America" on their CPUs. Well, Intel can't do the same thing. Actually, one of their most advanced fabs is in Ireland too, so they can't do that with Meteor Lake as well.
Yeah, it'd be the turntables turn.
Yeah. This piece of content is brought to you by FlexiSpot and their roster of high-quality adjustable standing desks and walking treadmills. Recently, co-host of Broken Silicon, Dan, received FlexiSpot's auto-incline walking treadmill, and of course, he already has an E7 desk to pair with it, and wow, put together, they're both very complementary and high-quality products. The walking treadmill is stylish, and it is easily moved around for storage with its included wheels, and additionally, the treadmill can be adjusted to a 12% max angle with 9 different elevations for higher calorie burning while you're walking, and it even has a speaker for playing music via Bluetooth from your phone, and it also has a 2-year warranty with enough durability to withstand up to 275 pounds of weight. And then, of course, in addition to the treadmill, the desk, what is there really left for me to say about these desks? They've sponsored me many times. I'm using an adjustable desk right now while making this video. My brother has one. My girlfriend uses one. We have another one in our guest room, and that's because genuinely, these are the highest quality office desks I've ever used. And yeah, we use a lot of FlexiSpot products, whether it's a vacuum, treadmill, chair, or desk. And that's because I've never come across one that isn't high quality. And so I do recommend them. And if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead, maybe get yourself one of their fantastic products. Click on the link in the description and follow the directions below to get the best prices on these products. If you do, you'll both be supporting the channel and also getting yourself the best deal you can. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out FlexiSpot products today. All right, so I want to bring this up because I think I don't know how much you've paid attention to like the developments in graphics cards right now that are launching soon, but question generated by Jensen GPT, quite a name, says RDNA 4 cards are already starting to show up at warehouses and in retail stockrooms in some parts of the world, meaning RDNA 4's launch probably isn't very far away, and yet AMD has not announced a release date, specs, or even pricing yet. What the heck gives here? By the way, let me say this was recorded on Sunday in the US, Monday in Taiwan, 1/19/2025. So I could easily conceive that when this comes out, AMD at the same time has announced everything. But I still think this is an interesting discussion. He says, anyways, what the heck gives here? Why does it always seem like AMD is so unsure on how to handle Radeon marketing? And I want to take this as an opportunity to add as well that today, before me and John here started recording, I was told by someone who works at a micro center that they have shelves filled with RDNA 4 graphics cards right now, at least at one location, which I assume that means multiple. And that this person's talking to me about how this has to have been a last minute decision because they've like paid a certain price to stock these cards at their location, and yet they don't know what they're allowed to sell them for yet from AMD. So I don't know. I just think that's absolutely hilarious. And there's tons of them. So I think the good news is it seems like there was going to be a lot of supply of these graphics cards for gamers that want them. But it is truly hilarious that AMD has shipped them before they know what they're going to cost.
Maybe they're waiting to hear whatever Nvidia's doing or some other competitor is doing.
Well, yeah, I think that's what's going on to a degree, right? I mean, like my suspicion, and this is kind of what I'm hearing behind the scenes, is AMD was going to go out because their press conference is right after, no, it was right before Nvidia's, yeah, and they were going to announce RDNA 4. The rumor I heard is they were going to announce the top card for 600 to 700, and the bottom card then conceivably, I'd say 500 to 600, and that's $100 or $200 more than people were expecting. And then they caught wind of two things. Nvidia was going to be very aggressive with pricing, at least compared to what we would have expected. I still don't know if it's aggressive enough to really be better than RDNA 4, but certainly they're going to charge less than people probably expected from their new generation. But at the same time, Nvidia came out and showed tons and tons of fake frames. Like, we're going to take one frame and turn it into 5 frames. We have the input lag of like 30 frames per second, but the screen says 240 hertz. And I think AMD is not sure how to respond to this marketing because it seems fantastical. And so I suspect AMD is going to make their own fake frame marketing, but then try to probably do, I would guess, what I would advise them to do is have a chart that's like like frame times and latency, because that removes the advantage of fake frames. So it's going to be weird. But yeah, that's what I think AMD is doing. And that is why they pulled the announcement from their CES show, I believe. Having said that, I still think it's weird they haven't announced it yet. They're at stores. From what I've been told, it's going to launch before the end of the month. We have 2 weeks left, people, and they're in stores. So I don't get what's taking them so long to announce it at this point. And that's why I say it wouldn't surprise me if this podcast comes out and they finally announced it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because it's like it's clearly that the company is more interested in this AI thing going on than
Mhm.
necessarily gaming, and I think that
Both of them,
maybe
right?
that's
AMD
filtering
and
through.
Nvidia.
Yeah, and I think it's just a math and business profit equation, and unfortunately, I mean, something's got to slip in some case, and I think that must be unfortunate. That looks to be gaming right now.
Dig Wiggler writes in, will AMD ever actually go for market share with graphics cards? I feel as if they have too many other priorities right now to use their capacity, server, AI, a huge push into laptops. This makes me think AMD doesn't really want to go after desktop GPU market share right now. The money just isn't in it for them. So I'm wondering what you think about that, though, because on the one hand, yes, I agree that this isn't the number one priority. Like, I saw some gaming oriented channels saying things like, how could AMD not talk about RDNA 4 at CES? This is their most important product of the year. And I'm like, no, it's not. It is like, I'm a gamer. It's probably the thing I'm most interested in, but absolutely, like, the laptop market share they're trying to take is probably most important. Tied with AI, only tied with AI because they aren't in AI as much yet. But if they were to be, that would be their number one priority if they could take that market share. And so I think I agree with that to at least. Like, they cut it for time because it's just not as important as Dell going up on stage and saying they're switching to AMD. That's insane that Dell would switch
Yeah.
to AMD.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I think like, something has to slip, like I said, and I think um, you know, like the AMD GPU segment hasn't always been the greatest in the past years, I would say. And I
Hmm.
think like you just something's gotta give, in my opinion. And it's maybe gaming just gets more attention because of its demographic, but like you're right. There's a lot of things that are so much more important that's going on right now that contributes to AMD's success. And like it's Dell was stuck with Intel for so many years, and now they're defecting. It's very very interesting.
And by the way, behind the scenes, I'm hearing they might be. I mean, who knows? This becomes another report out of my channel, but like that they're like maybe like really defecting. Like, it's not like they went on stage to just be like, "Hey, I'm next to AMD." It's like they might be like flipping their focus, like from Intel to AMD, in a way that I don't think people. That I suspect people are underestimating. And from what I've heard, it's because they're furious with like how Granite Rapids is turning out, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see. I think like if TSMC is ramping up in a way that's insane right now, so maybe they're ramping up for something not necessarily AI, but laptops. Who knows?
Well, so I want to ask you what you think about this, and I assume we talked about this last time you were on as well, just to get this out of the way. Also today, I want to put on screen here, like, that I've heard what's going on with. I know Nvidia announced this aggressive pricing with Blackwell graphics cards, but from what I've heard from a couple of sources in retail here, is that the 5080, it kind of sounds like it's de facto going to cost $1,100 to $1,500. I hope I'm wrong about that, but at least that's what it looks like. An incredibly limited volume. The 5090 is going to be very, very, very rare. A lot of them are going to charge well above MSRP. I don't think that surprises that many people in AI, but I swear I brought this up with you before, though, because NVIDIA has a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to focus on what will make them the most money, which is AI. Couldn't you see this as, and because they can charge, $5,000 for an AI sticker on a gaming card instead of $1,000, like, do you think this could be an opening for AMD and graphics this year, though? Because it might be one of those things where it's like AMD undercuts Nvidia. They only make, only like 40-50% margins on these graphics cards, let's say, or even 30% if they want to be aggressive. And that sounds like a lot, though. It's like 30-50% margins. That's incredible. And it's like, yeah, but Nvidia, they're getting 100%, 200, 300% margins with their AI chips as well. So don't you think there could be a situation here where Nvidia's like, AMD, you can go from 20 to 30% market share, and that will mean a lot to AMD because we would rather use all of this to make 3 times as much money with the same capacity in AI.
Uh, I would imagine, and like, if knowing what we know about Jensen, is he really like that? Like, if he starts getting emails from people to saying AMD's starting to take market share in graphics cards, like you'll get a 2 a.m. email from him being like, "We need to fix this in some way, form, or shape." He seems like a nice guy, but he's also crazy, insane, competitive. Like,
Yes,
I
I hear
really
that so
doubt.
consistently from everybody.
Yeah,
Well, you can see it too.
yeah, you can see it. Like, I highly doubt that he's just going to let AMD march in. And definitely, I think he can. He handles 60 direct reports. I think he can spend a little bit of his brain power on kicking AMD back down again. Who knows?
Right, and that has to be part of why, for example, I was told the 5080 would probably be 1,200. I was told the 5070 Ti be 800, 5070 600, 5090 2000. It was 2000. We'll see. 2000 on paper. Let's see if it actually is in practice. Um, and that's why I assume he charged less for the rest of the lineup, though, because he knows AMD is going to be aggressive, and he's like, no. And I do hear this consistently every now and then when I get to talk to some of my contacts at NVIDIA. They're like, to be clear, even though AI is the focus, Jensen never wants to lose gaming. Like, he just sees that as the crown jewel, like the thing that he can like wave as a flag in front of everyone the most. He was gamer too. I assume he still plays some games, but I don't know how you play games with how busy he is. It probably matters to him the most because that's really what started his company. Um, but like, how do you think they would really react? Like, that's because I've already put out benchmarks from inside AMD, like at least internal testing at AMD, and it's a month ago, so who knows? Could have improved by now. Shows the 9070 XT seemingly actually beating the 5070 Ti for like, presumably it'll be like a $600 card that beats a $750 card, and that means their cut down variant will be like a $500 card that destroys. Nvidia's $550 card. Do you think Nvidia though would drop prices? Right, like the last time Nvidia did emergency price drops was like the GTX 200 series with like the 2016, the 2080. Well, Nvidia was like $10 a share back then, so it's a very different company. Like, how do you think Nvidia would handle it if AMD actually just did have a technological winner here?
I think, I think Nvidia internally is definitely like that type of company to say, like, I think I read in the Nvidia Waybook there was something they say internally, like, we don't cut prices, we charge for
Yeah,
the value of our brand. I would reckon that they'll find some way to improve the performance of the $500 card, maybe create a new price tier somewhere. I'm just throwing stuff ideas out, but I don't see them cutting prices on existing, from like backing away from existing price point.
I agree because that would just look so. It's just not in their nature. And like, but do you think in response is the only other way to do this is when Nvidia floods the market with supply, it tends to sell because of their brand power. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember years ago when the RTX 3050 was outselling the RX 6600, despite costing like on average $50, like $20 more and being like 40%, 50% weaker. Like that's, do you think they would divert supply though to the 5070 to just like swamp the market with them so they're everywhere? Would they really do that when they're trying to catch up in AI contracts here that they just can't keep up with?
Mm, I'm sure they would if they have enough lead time and they can communicate with their. I mean, if they communicate with TSMC, I'm sure TSMC can meet the capacity.
You think they just try to buy up as much as they can then and like fix it that way?
They'll probably get allocated more, or I think the best way to look at it is like, if you look at it from a TSMC perspective, it's like there's going to be capacity opening up because Apple's going to
Mm,
be moving up at some point. So like we'll see what happens. I think it's and they're still building more. They're constantly
right.
building more. So a lot of that new capacity is coming up for grabs, and I think you're going to see it's going to be great for people.
Carbon Cry writes in, he says, with rampant overinvestment in leading edge capacity, are we heading into a significant crunch for TSMC too? Samsung is mothballing fabs meanwhile, and Intel can't fill theirs at all. If there is any weakening or even a stall of growth of AI demand, will TSMC also be hit with the pains of malinvestment?
That's a great question. I think they definitely think about that. I think right now there's probably enough locked in revenue for the next 2 to 3 years. You wouldn't invest their capital investment budget for 2025 is something like $40 billion, like 38 to 40 billion. Like I've never imagined it ever that high. Like you don't build that much without anticipating that it's going to be sold for a good return. And I think even if you do hit a bit soft patch on the AI side, I've always felt like this new N2 node is something special, and
Hmm.
like it's
I
going to
hear that
be,
as well.
yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, so it's going to be, there will be people who want that. So
Hmm.
like it's going to be. I think obviously they're very concerned about like over investment, but like it's I think they're more apt to push harder than they had before because they know once the capacity's there, the demand will probably come up for it too. They probably made a mistake. They had like what Fab 20s in there, like was supposed to be their original N2 fab, and it was a very small fab. Like it's very
Hmm.
near the main R&D fab, but it's very small. Like they had to like clear off a hill for it. So it's like it's not relatively that big. And I've always like my always suspected that it was because they didn't think N2 was going to be that popular at the time. And then AI came and suddenly it was like now it's a huge deal. Now they're moving all that capacity down to Kaohsiung where they're doing 6 phases all at once. It's going to be crazy.
No, it's the 2 nanometer stuff I hear as well. And I've heard this again from other industry veterans who have come on the podcast over the past 12 months. Like everyone, I believe, thought 3 nanometer was going to be the node. And to an extent, all nodes are the node for some amount of time. But what I mean, I have many examples of this actually. Like originally, all of Zen 5 was supposed to be 3 nanometer. Then they only made like the Epic chips on 3 nanometer. They decided to move to 4 nanometer for the overwhelming majority of their lineup. Um, and I heard about other companies. Actually, Nvidia Blackwell, I heard was supposed to be all 3 nanometer as well, and they switched all to 4 nanometer. And it seems like behind the scenes, I'm just hearing like I'm hearing like Zen 6 planning to use a lot of 2 nanometer, some 3 for a lot of the consumer products, but a lot of 2 nanometer as quickly as possible. Nvidia might as well for some of their upcoming products. It seems like there's this like 3 nanometer was there. It took forever, had a lot of problems. And then 2 nanometer early results came in and everyone was like, straight to 2. And we're just like getting the cheaper stuff on 4 and the better stuff on 2 as soon as possible. And that probably took TSMC quite off guard.
Yeah, yeah. Like who's going to pay for N2 at the beginning because it's a brand new transistor and it's going to be very like there's a lot of uncertainty about it. N3E I think is relatively good node and it's very smooth, but you're right, maybe it is caught in the middle between what is a very very stable, very strong node which is N4 and like the really intriguing step improvement. It is a true shrink, which I think is fun, very fun.
Well, speaking of something that isn't a true shrink, Planet Nine writes in and says, "Hi, John. Given all the talk about the possibilities of the Switch 2's node of choice, what is your take?" And it's long been rumored to use Samsung 8 nanometer and some modification of like the orange chip and stuff. My understanding, actually, from someone at Nvidia, is that it was done 2 years ago or three, maybe. And I said, "So why isn't this out?" And they said, "I don't know. I'm not in Nintendo." And now it sounds like finally they're announcing the Switch 2. I still hear it's probably 8 nanometer. What do you think? It's kind of a for fun question, but how do you feel about Nintendo launching an 8 nanometer handheld in 2025?
Oh my gosh. I think it's indicative of like their style, their philosophy, right? They take really old, really old hardware in this case, and they're kind of using that to emphasize their what they think is their advantage in like play style, creativity, art, all that stuff. And I think it's just Nintendo being Nintendo. It's pretty fun. I think it's like they waiting 2 years to launch something that looks, no offense, but it looks quite similar to the Switch One is
Yeah,
pretty
it's the same thing, really.
makes me wonder what happened there. Maybe there's a lot of stuff that didn't work out, but like it's pretty funny, I think. But I think the fact that you can say that it'll probably be successful anyways, but like to say that have a successful gaming product that uses a note that's probably 10 years old, 10 plus years old is,
What?
you
Because
know,
it's a refined 10 nanometer. Really,
yeah,
is what 8 nanometer is at Samsung. It's yeah, that is getting pretty old at this point. Then, jeez,
they need the money, Samsung. They need the business, that's for sure. So,
it's probably the best aspect of it is propping up Samsung, right? I mean,
and it's probably going to be super cheap. So, great for Nintendo too. I think it's just the way Nintendo works, and I give them props for it because it's definitely kind of different thinking than most people would kind of take, and it shows how unique they are.
yeah, I mean, my answer is I've always thought Samsung 8 nanometer is fantastic for a Nintendo console because they're not competing with TSMC capacity. They've got all the production they want. They can make
Yeah,
200 million of these freaking things if they want to for the price that they want to make them. The problem I have is I just would be more exciting if it was 2 years ago. And the fact that the Switch, I think it has a better cooling in the dock, but that's not rocket science. I just think the fact that from what because I think I put my first leak out about it like in 2021 and was told there were dev kits in 22. I don't understand. I just think Nintendo said, yeah, we don't need it yet. We're going to milk the Switch one. We have like one more lineup of big games coming late 24. Let's milk it, and then we'll launch it. In fact, I hear behind the scenes they're furious that they had to show off the Switch 2 this early because everyone kept showing pictures of it in factories. I'm like, dude, this thing's 2 years old. It's going to leak. Like, what do you want?
I definitely agree with you. This thing could have took. That's why I think something might have been gone wrong in the
Yeah.
development process. Maybe there's a game thing, or they couldn't. They tried. They had some crazy idea, and it didn't work out. Like that makes me wonder if they hit Plan B for this route.
Yeah. I would wonder that, like, and who knows what could happen. I mean, it, they're not like I know they have a massive supply of like cash in a bank, but they're not like this massive hardware manufacturer like Sony is, where like it's conceivable something that sounds silly went wrong. Like, what if the supplier of the chassis screwed up? Or like, I don't know, like, what if some component, a battery, like something that isn't the first thing we would think of, just went completely haywire and they just didn't feel rushed. I feel like that has to have been what happened if it is still 8 nanometer.
Yeah, or they were thinking they're going to do something that was like utterly like some new form factor, like maybe the Wii remotes have screens in them or something, or
Hmm.
I don't know, like it has like it's like how the Wii U was like super weird, and then
Yes.
so they did that, and then they were kind of thinking about it, and then they looked at it and just like we can't ship this, and like let's just go for the other stuff.
This is a random thought. Are you surprised it's called the Switch 2? Because I thought for sure they'd go with Super Switch.
Yeah, Switch 2. That would be fun. But then they called it the Wii U, so who knows? Like the Nintendo,
Maybe
they
that's
kind
the
of
lesson. They're like, no more fun names. Put a number at the end of it if it's popular.
yeah, and then like it seems like a lot of it's like backwards compatibility. They're really emphasizing that part. So I would say makes kind of sense. They went safe. Um, would be fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember people debating if it was going to have backwards compatibility. I'm like, of course it will. insane not to with the sales they had of the other generation. Are you out of your mind?
And some of the older Switch games could barely play on the Switch itself. Like there's clearly improvement for hardware on the hardware side.
Hmm.
So
On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, Alberto Molero writes in and says, "Are GPUs more likely to get improvements from AI and logic processes than die shrinks?" And I also bring this up because you see Nintendo not caring to use the newest node, or at least that's certainly not their driving. Like they don't see it as they have to, um, and still making products that sell well. And this question reminded me of Battle Mage of like they just and Intel going to 3 nanometer with Arrow Lake and think, oh, if we just buy the most expensive thing, we'll win. They're not. Like I think what we're learning is especially because nodes, the difference between them isn't like a factor of two anymore. It's like 20%, 30% better, maybe. And for a good in process improvement. Like you can't just depend on buying the most expensive thing. Your design has to be the best and maybe use the best node or not use the best node and still win.
yeah, I think like there's going to be. I'm not totally up to speed with all the stuff AI is doing, what Synopsys and these guys are doing on the design side, because there's a lot of it and there's a lot of, I guess, juice to be squeezed out of that lemon. I think I think there's going to be a nice big bump in the coming years as they integrate AI into more of this. I just wonder if it's more like for saving, design time,
Mm.
designer effort rather than actually improving performance. Um, I am maybe a little bit older school, which I still think a great die shrink still is a great tool. But then maybe the thing to say more is that an absolute cutting leading edge node is not as fully developed, not as fully capable as like a more mature node, right? So one of the reasons Apple goes to is always the first to go to a leading like cutting edge node is that they get to help define the PDK. They get to
Mm.
help expand out the capability of the
They're on
node,
the
right?
ground floor of defining what that node will do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think they're really good at that. I think then, other companies then have to go in and they have to do that really hard work to define all that node, all the parts of that node. And, it's not fully developed ecosystem at that time. So, there's can easily said that there's an economic decision to be made at that point. Like to wait a little bit longer, try to get a better kind of try to get a product that's easier to work with and to like give you a lot more freedom and not just like so yeah, I agree with you a lot on that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like if you're not literally the first person on the node defining what it means to be 2 nanometer, then again, in a world where the nodes aren't like it's not like double the like Moore's law is dead, it's like double the transistors. How much advantage is there really to having the teething issues if the node's only 20% better, right? Especially if you can spend all of this time, you can spend some of that money you would have spent paying for more expensive silicon, paying good designers to just use a node they know will work perfectly and design a smarter layout.
Yep. And you're waiting basically how long it takes to design a product, 2 years or something. Like you
Hmm.
gotta that's a lot of risk you're bearing. So I think a lot of companies, you wouldn't fault them for taking the safer route because you'll get a working chip at the end. Because nothing is worse than, the product is ready, but the chip isn't. And now your product is crippled. That's a
Hmm.
terror situation there.
Lucas writes in, for how much longer do you think the market will continue to bear the cost of increasingly more expensive nodes? Between the crypto and now AI crazes, there have been a number of successive events of extreme demand where the price barely mattered. But surely this will eventually have to come to a head. What do you think that might look like? Will demand just slow down or will there be some sort of crash? There's already more capacity than the industry really knows what to do with, too.
I think it's like that's the question that's been facing every company out there or every semiconductor fab company
Hmm.
out there. And that's been the question for, I say, decades. I would reckon that the beauty of the foundry model is that you can kind of, you can discover and boost new demand as it comes up, right? I think in the beginning, nobody thought you would need faster nodes, but then the mobile industry came up and then
Sure.
no one thought you would need faster nodes, and then cloud came and no one thought you'd need faster nodes, and suddenly now you have AI. I think like you should. I think it's the beauty of it is that you can kind of rely on the market to discover something. When the capacity is there, I think people will start finding new ways to use it. Now, the question is, there is a question to be asked: is like, will the cost be economical for those products with the performance you're going to get? Like, not enough people going to M3 because N4 is just so good.
Hmm.
I think that is of course, a concern. Um, I think
And like,
it's
how much improvement really is there? If like, I forgot, like, it's like the rumors of like what, $30,000 a 2 nanometer wafer or something ridiculous. Like if the nodes always fit, like, because I think before, like going from like 7 nanometer to 5, it's like, I don't know, 30% more expensive, but you're getting over 30% more density, at least theoretically. And then on top of that, it's better transistors, so it's easily worth it. And that's why things got a little bit better price performance still, even though the nodes were so expensive. Assuming demand, yeah, I'm assuming supply actually could catch up with demand, which it has largely in some markets in the past couple of years. And then, the same thing going to like 4 nanometer and then 3. But it feels like with 2 nanometer, if they're just going to like double the cost of the node, not only is that not keeping up with the density increase, but it's not going to break even with how much better the transistors are either. I don't like, so like, how much improvement is there really for an AI chip where you can charge 50 grand? Probably a ton. But for other things, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think same as when Planar went to FinFET 15 years ago. 15 years ago? Oh my gosh, yeah, 15 years ago. That was like a lot of companies got left behind in that
Mm,
transition. Now TSMC is trying to get them to port over to FinFET, but you can see it's not hard to think that another situation like that will happen for Gate All Around, where maybe only the AI people and the mobile people cross
mm.
over because they get the most benefit from the power saving aspects of the node. And I think it's kind of like there's a lot of companies that's probably going to be a lot slower in the transition, and a lot of companies that just won't make it over. And we just have to accept that that's going to happen, or the fabs that will have to accept that that's just going to happen, and it's on them to find new demand for that. And for now, I think they have all that they can need, but of course the future is definitely to be a concern, because progressive node improvements are going to require brand new innovation technologies, which means new supply chains need to be set up, new people need to be trained, and like it's not necessarily like, oh, we can just get better at the node. You know what I mean? You can't
Hmm.
just do the same things over again. You need to develop brand new ecosystems for that, and that's going to cost money. And I think people need to not always be attracted by the latest node. But who knows? I mean, it works as a marketing tool.
Yeah, I think a good indicator of like where consumer products are going to go with silicon over the next few years, like kind of like how they use the cost to make a hamburger as like a proxy for inflation, because like, oh, there's the lettuce and the bun and the packaging and shipping. It kind of takes everything into account. What node does the PS6 use? Because Sony tends to use the most advanced node recently. I mean, the PS5 used 7 nanometers. It's crazy. Um, and they're using 4 nanometer, which isn't the most cutting edge, but for the PS5 Pro, does the PS6 go to 2 nanometer to 1.6 nanometer, or do they stay back? I would suspect at least two, but I think that decision is going to tell us a lot, because that's like the gold standard of like 100 million advanced gaming devices sold every 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, I reckon maybe they go to three. But I mean, AMD is probably the partner for that, right? So
Yeah,
whatever AMD is most comfortable with, and I don't think AMD is going to ship a N2. I don't think a leading
3 years from now,
AMD's.
you think?
Ooh, yeah, I don't think
I
it'll
think
be.
27, 28.
I think that's probably going to be more. There's still going to be more AI stuff. Yeah, in the end.
Competing with too much AI competing there. I mean, it really
Mm,
will depend on the node of whatever the latest AMD graphics card is, probably, right?
yeah.
Like, are they at 2 nanometer there? Yeah, because I think there's an argument that, like, this is getting off subject, but a thing I've thought about for the PS6 is I think the decision Sony's going to have to make. is number one, do people buy the PS5 Pro for $700? The answer seems to be yes. So if the answer is yes, they can afford to make it a little more expensive. But do they make like a really small for a console, 200 millimeter squared 2 nanometer node, 2 nanometer die, or like a 300 millimeter squared 3 nanometer? I think that's going to be the question: is do they use the latest node, but it's just not very big. I think that's going to be the dilemma for them probably. But of course, a lot of things could happen. What, AI market crashes? Who cares? They can probably afford to use it.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. But do you think the AI market's going to crash?
I think that was some of the questions for this. I mean, do you? I get, and this kind of feeds into like why is Jensen Huang being more aggressive here with Blackwell? Is it because the performance isn't as high as they wanted? Maybe a little bit on the gaming side, certainly not on the AI. But like, is this an insurance policy? Because I've long thought like Jensen is just so ahead, like a year ahead of the market in making the graphics for cards for AI, which means that he, like, by the time Intel, if they do, who knows, they're like canceling half they canceled Rialto Bridge, I think, like whatever Intel's next big AI chip is, if by the time that comes out the bubbles popped, Nvidia is going to be happy they launched an AI generation twice a year for like 2 years or whatever they're trying to do. Like, and I've always thought that if the AI bubble were to pop, that is when out of nowhere you're going to see these graphics cards get cheaper from Nvidia as they try to swoop in and retake that market, as a backup plan. So
Yeah,
I suspect they might in the next 2 years, I guess is my answer. I didn't even answer your question there.
I think the AI market is like on the AI side. What I mean, it's clear that Jensen's competing against these hyperscalers, right? That they
Yeah.
build their own chips. They're all building that, and it seems pretty clear that they will eventually build their own chips. So, which is probably why Jensen is thinking about building his own scale cloud. But I I don't know if the AI market's going to keep going the way it's going right now. It needs to show some return of some sort.
Besides cats with messed up claws,
Cats are messed up claws or strange or homework tools. So
that still get the question wrong half the time, but write it for you.
yeah. So like I we need to see that, and at least from my perspective, like they're probably pushing so hard on this because they feel like the market doesn't have as much time as they think they have,
Yes,
and they're
that's what I
pushing.
think.
They want to get something out there to get ahead of whatever these TPU and craniums and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. I guess it could go two ways. Like if there is truly, because I think I had an AI researcher on, I believe actually it was, God, it's already been that long. I think at the end of 23. And what he said is there's going to be like an exponential curve up and then a plateau of what you can really get out of it. I think Brian Heemsker brought that up too. He's a game developer. It's like you're going to get this exponential curve and they'll start plateauing and we'll go, just like the internet. Oh, this is what we can do with the internet until technology improves. And then it'll go up again. If they were to get to that breakthrough in the next year, I don't know. I mean, I think the shortages will go on for another 10 years then, because that's just going to funnel so much. But at the same time, like when I talk about a bubble popping, I think it's worth pointing out that bubble popping doesn't mean AI failed. Like people keep misunderstanding. Like Bitcoin crashing from 70,000 to only 20,000. Like it's still worth a lot. And if I look at Nvidia stock over time here, let me go to the max. So yeah, right now it's like what? And of course it's been split several times, I believe. Like it says $138 right now. Okay, so if it were to crash to where it was 5 years ago, that is, oh my God, how many times have they split this stock? I mean, we're talking like a factor of like 20 or 30 times less. So Nvidia could lose 90% of their value. And I think they might be worth more, right, than they were certainly 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And with that type of that's what I think I have to say when I say bubble popping. The AI market could become worth a tenth of what it was 5 years ago. It still might, a tenth of what it is now. It still might be bigger than what it was 5 years ago. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, in some ways, there's no going back. Bubble popping would be more of like a cleaning of kind of the cruft that's kind of accumulated in the past 2 years, 1 or 2 years. There'll be a reset of expectations. There, people will, maybe you will stop getting a lot of like these influencers you know, peddling their AI game breaking solutions. You'll stop seeing the headlines getting so much attention, but the technology will still keep improving. The
Yeah.
companies that made money will still keep making money, maybe just less of it. And I think we will continue to get interesting products from companies down the line. That's just that's the cycle. That's how it works.
And now a quick word from our channel partner, Mint Mobile.
Hey there, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. Enticing, right?
That is enticing, Ryan. Well, please make sure you clean that up in the yard. What a funny neighbor to have out there. Great guy. Yeah, say hi to Blake for me. I got to do the ad, though, for you. So, anyways, this piece of content is brought to you by Mint Mobile. It's honestly been a very long time since I've looked around at phone plans, but I kind of had to in preparation for this ad. And when I did, I have to admit that some of Mint Mobile's competitors, and I'm not supposed to mention them, but some of them, they just don't want you to see what you're paying for. But not Mint Mobile. They tell you what things cost, what you get, and what limitations there are in a very upfront manner. And that's probably because they know they have nothing to hide, and that's really their greatest selling point. You can get a family plan and a family plan, switch to or from a solo plan, and upgrade it mid-month as you need on whatever phone you already own. And yeah, that's the benefit of Mint Mobile. It's great pricing and flexibility to do whatever you want. And you know what? If you click that link in the description and sign up, it actually does help me quite a lot. It helps this channel a ton since I'm partnering with them. And actually, for a limited amount of time, you will get 50% off Mint Mobile's 12-month unlimited plan if you sign up before the current promotion expires. So you're not only helping the channel, you're also helping yourself if you go to the link in the description. Support Moore's Law is Dead by signing up for Mint Mobile today. All right. Well, speaking of going to a tenth of your prior value, we got to start talking about Intel here. Chris Rich writes in and says, Intel's share of the CPU market in do-it-yourself seems to have collapsed to about 10% in many countries in the West, at least in recent monthly sales. Any idea how they are doing in the East? So how prevalent is like Intel, and I guess do-it-yourself is very different than the entire market, but like, are you seeing this surging of AMD in Asia as well? Like, because
I think
it's crazy in the US.
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of enthusiast market, at least in Taiwan, is pretty in line with what it's in the West. So I would say that yeah, there's a lot of which means that it's going to be really interesting to see the results, Intel's reporting results whenever they come out soon. It's going to be it's going to be fireworks.
So, and I just want to ask you in general here, like, how do you feel about how Intel is doing? It's funny, like, I looked at the last episode we recorded a year ago, and it was interesting. Like, one of our main discussions, like, if there was World War III, would Intel benefit more than other countries? And it's like, I don't even think of it in the same way anymore. I'm not even thinking of like, what can they benefit from? I'm thinking, are they going to survive? And it just, and we've talked, it's the third time we've done this. Every year every year I talk with a guest that I speak with once or twice a year. It just feels like every time compared to the last time, I actually can't believe how much the conversation has changed with Intel's situation every single time. Like, how do you feel about Intel right now, where they came from, and what their future looks like?
I think like Intel, there's a lot of, I maybe part of the reason why Intel is so difficult to kind of pull itself out of its current spiral is that people have a lot of fundamental disagreement on what path that the company needs to take going forward. And at some point, it's kind of like in the Schrodinger's cat kind of thing. They're kind of stuck in this box where, are they a foundry? Are they a product company? Where's the money coming from? Stuff like that. And I think like trying to change that either path seems like it's going to be extremely expensive, extremely execution dependent, and extremely painful for all shareholders and all partners involved, all stakeholders involved. So like the company just continues doing its thing as it is. And I that's probably why it's so challenging to kind of see ways out, because all the pathways, all the off ramps are very difficult, and the future ahead on the current path is, not rosy. My particular opinion is that the off ramps are so difficult that
Right.
as a public company, that the company will continue limping along as it is, assuming some major event doesn't happen, a la like a Elon Musk acquisition or something.
Intel fanboy writes in. He says, "Which company do you think could actually get regulatory approval to acquire Intel?" Um, well, I'll jump in here. I think if it happens, it's because the U.S. government nudges it to happen. I've heard behind the scenes, and I think there was public reporting of this, that there have been talks at AMD of like the Defense Department and like parts of the U.S. government, like, "Hey, AMD, we wanted you to buy Intel. Would you?" Like, we're just curious, because this is a grave concern for, yeah, again, for the U.S. government.
The regulatory approval, I think, in the United States isn't the main concern that I have. My main
Mm.
concern is the regulatory approval in China, because Intel sells a lot into China, and and China basically nixed their last big acquisition attempt, which was Tower Semi.
Yeah.
Tower Semi was supposed to be the seed for their future foundry, which would
I
have been a
heard
good
there could have been some tit for tat thing going on behind the scenes there too, by the
Yeah.
way, with the CCP.
Yeah. And the way they do things is that they don't say no, they just sit forever. Awkward silence for like months and months. And then, if you try to, the thing about an acquisition attempt is that if you try to acquire, if you don't get that instant approval off the bat, the longer this thing stays in limbo, the longer things get worse and worse and worse. Talent starts bleeding, products partners start jumping. So
People ask, are we ever going to be able to start this project? Like, again, like with Nvidia and ARM.
yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think like that can't be sustained for, I can't imagine, for more than 2 years. So it's tough. So like we'll see what happens. I don't think any company can get regulatory approval to acquire Intel. I think the closest with
What about Broadcom?
The thing is that like Hock Tan doesn't know what to do about the fabs, so he can handle the product side. I think he could probably do it
Octane and
pretty well.
Broadcom.
Yeah. He can probably kind of make that product group successful again. I think the problem is that he doesn't know what to do with the fabs, which means do you spin them off or do you sell them? But then if you sell them, who will buy them? Because you'll need to put immense amount of money in them. The fabs are basically being subsidized to some extent by the products, and like it's challenging. And I want to add, like, Intel is extremely divisive right now. So like if you stand on any side of what to do, there's going to be a massive wall of sound from the internet telling you that you're immensely wrong. So
I know.
I just want to.
Someone who does my YouTube channel. But it's interesting. I agree. Like, I don't know like you mentioned your thing about the off ramps. I don't know what they can really do. Like, I don't know how many times, like I said, well, if Intel doesn't nail this, this is it. Like, going all the way back to like Alder Lake was really good. I liked Alder Lake, recommended it a ton. And then there's this year of me being optimistic about Intel, where I'm like, I don't know, Alder Lake was great. Alchemist is coming. Surely that'll be good. They've got all these software engineers. Surely their drivers would have issues. And then that didn't happen. And I was like, okay, well, it seems like their graphics are screwed. So I guess Meteor Lake has to be really good. And Raptor Lake does. Raptor Lake kind of was, then turns out it doesn't work. Meteor Lake's a bust. And it's like, okay, well, Raptor Lake has to be the best. It's not. Meteor Lake has to be the best. Loses to AMD's prior gen. Arrow Lake has to be the best. It seems like a price to performance manufacturing disaster. And Battle Mage has to be. It doesn't exist, because if they made them, they'd go out of business because they just can't make them profitably. Okay, so it seems like, how many times have I said that they have to nail it and they haven't? And I don't see where they go from here, where besides just limping along and hoping they can edge out like a 10% margin and keep a third of the market. But that means they're going to keep shrinking and layoffs. And that just seems like a death spiral to me. And so call me crazy, I just see some sort of buyout or acquisition is the only end point. I just don't know how small they have to get for it to be easy enough for a company to do it.
Yeah, but I think like that buyout, if you look at the stock value of the company, that's not the number that people should be concerned about, right? It's the future number of the investments you need to make in the manufacturing
Hmm.
and like the equipment and the fabs, unless you spin the fabs up. But then that's not going away too. So like it's a lot more than probably would anticipate. And I think it's like the thing about Intel is that, and other big companies that I've kind
Hmm.
of done videos about over the time, is that they can limp along for years, right?
Decades,
Years,
maybe.
decades. Like IBM is still around to some extent, right? Like it's like they can last. So, you know, it's the thing that has the path that has the least sort of impediment is like they just limp along for another 20, 30 years, and they slowly sell this, sell that, spin this off, break this down, and they slowly sort of fall down to some sort of, you know, it's like a neutron star or something, a you know, slowly decaying into nothingness. And that will probably be I mean, that should be fair. Companies should be allowed to die and grow
Hmm.
small, and
If they don't compete effectively.
if they don't compete. No company has been around, has been dominant for 100 or even 80 plus or 70 plus years. Like if that's an
Just the East India
indication.
Trading Company, you could argue.
Yeah,
Besides
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but even then, you know, where
Even
is it?
then, that was like a weird situation, right? It's like companies shouldn't be allowed to be like that, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, I know that's an interesting point because it's something I brought up too. Is a lot of the most hate I seem to get online is people that seem to root for Intel with this idea that if they don't compete, the industry dies. AMD charges 10 grand for CPUs out of nowhere and it's a monopoly. And it's like, I don't know. I hear Nvidia's making CPUs now. Um, you know, Apple's making their own CPUs. I hear ARM might make dedicated graphics cards in the next few years. That might be like someone's going to replace them. I don't think there's any worry about that.
If you think about it, what's special about a CPU, right? Like nothing particularly. It's just another chip within the system. It's microprocessors have existed for years. Microprocessors used to be made by all kinds of different companies, Motorola and whatnot.
Sure.
I think you could argue perhaps the Intel's dominance in the CPU, PC oriented CPUs, is an accident of history and thus must be unwound. So like
It's not the
um
steady state of the
yeah, it's not
industry.
the steady state, and like it comes at a cost of, you know, they kind of ruled over this fiefdom of PC makers and like suppliers and you know, so a lot, they sucked out a lot of other value out of other parts of the chain, and they, you know, I could make an argument to say that that's not normal and that needs to be unwound in some sense, and the cost of that is that Intel becomes much smaller.
Hmm. Quick Jumper writes in and says, I've noticed a stark contrast in how Intel and AMD approach chip innovation. Intel either makes small iterations or jumps into multiple major changes at once, like Arrow Lake combining Power via RibbonFET new packaging. Meanwhile, AMD shows a more balanced evolution lately. They started with basic chiplets in Zen 2 or Zen 1, enhanced their Infinity Fabric interconnect, added unified L3 with Zen 3, introduced fee cache. Then with each generation, they improve their core microarchitecture, like Zen 4's front-end improvements with better branch prediction, larger op cache, wider issue width. Is Intel's all-or-nothing approach to architectural innovation actually the thing that's been holding them back compared to AMD's parallel progress in both packaging and microarchitecture, in your opinion?
I think it's important to, I love this question. I think it's important to take a look at the differences between how Intel and AMD generate or bring a new technology from R&D into commercial product, right? Intel in past history has always done it alone. They did it all alone. They researched it all alone. They productized it alone, and that leads you to situations where it seems like a product looks like it's a huge jump forward, right? They'll take something out of, like, they'll see something in some academics propose somewhere, they'll turn it into a real product. FinFET, for example, RibbonFET now, Power Via, all that stuff. Like they're trying to do ruthenium interconnects and all that. They would make a huge proposal, and then they will somehow drag the rest of the industry to go with them. AMD, on the other side, they don't do their manufacturing. They have to work with TSMC to develop the product. And that means going through a very more consensus, consortium, aligned world where they need to work slowly with TSMC to develop the product and develop their flavor of it to make it beneficial. And in some ways, it has its upsides and downsides, right? And I think like Intel's process way used to work much better because it allowed them to really run out ahead, right? I
That
think
matters less now, though, like we were talking about, right? It matters less to have the best node now.
it matters less, and also is the reason why they started failing so badly. They pushed too far ahead and they fell off the cliff. I think I think nowadays when they make declarations where they would say we want the photo mask to be much larger now, or I think it's like 6 inch by 6 inch or something. I don't have the exact number. They make these declarations just like they did 15, 20 years ago, except now, back then if they did 15, 20 years ago, the suppliers would be like, yes, sir, and then they'll all start working on it. But now it's a lot more nuanced because Intel makes that declaration. They're going to go through it. They're going to start thinking, well, this will cost this. We need to do this more. We need to do all this. They'll start starting the but. I think one of the things that I love about Intel way more than TSMC is that Intel is willing to have the balls to make those sort of calls and to try to drag the industry forward in a very innovative way. I think TSMC doesn't do that. They're very conservative, and that's one of their, in my opinion, flaws. They're not willing to make those sort of wild moonshots. And like it's each benefits their own, which is why I say that it's important that Intel remains a big player in the ecosystem going forward.
Mm-hmm. So they're at least doing those moonshots, but at the same time, it's that old school way of doing things, one might even argue. I know Daniel Nenny would certainly argue that. That has led AMD to leapfrog them, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, like,
and TSMC, both of them. Yeah,
it's still semiconductor manufacturing. You're still manipulating the atoms, and you're still trying to do the impossible in some respects. So, yeah, moonshotting the impossible means you have to miss a lot of shots. So, like, I think that's fair. That's a fair criticism.
Kiln God writes in, says, Tom and John, if Intel got bought by some Elon-led consortium, I see this as the end of the line of x86 laptops. Do you see this differently? I don't know if I necessarily think that, but I think that is an interesting question that keeps popping up if you're like, well, who could buy Intel? Do they stay all x86? Like, what happens if they were bought out by someone? It probably depends on who it is, but
I think the thing that is interesting about the way Elon runs his companies is that they work at a sense of intense crisis. They cut really deep. They cut, and then they try to bring back. They cut deep until they have to bring people back. Then they know they've cut enough. I think like one thing you could say that's good about an Elon acquisition, setting aside all the politics, is that like he's probably going to cut that company to a tolerable.
At least you won't be able to say that a long time ago. Yeah.
You'll say that you'll say that the cuts are done now. I think the thing that'll be very, very, very interesting is that they're going to be able to. I've heard the way that Elon works is that he has this team of like insane geniuses or something. They rotate throughout all the companies, solving like incredibly difficult problems by looking at it at a new and very unusual perspective, right? So there is a ideal case, I guess you can argue, where Intel has major problems and they bring in this utterly cracked team and they go look at various parts of the supply chain and somehow consolidate. And you can say they remake the whole semiconductor process. You could say you don't need all these CVD tools. Maybe you only need one PVD tool or one ALD tool, or everything should be ALD, right? They can really find a fresh way to look at it that Elon can enable because it's Elon. And that was something that is I would say it's like kind of like the best case scenario where you could get a real jump improvement of Intel, a turnaround, I would say. The x86 part would be, I think, a smaller portion of that. But maybe they'll do ARM. Maybe they won't do ARM. I say x86 is still way more robust ecosystem than ARM is on the PC. So like I don't think that's changing anytime soon. Yeah, but there's also, like I said, there's a case where he tries and it crashes and the yields don't work, and then suddenly it's just like imagine a PC chip that comes out at the same timeline as Tesla full self-driving. Like like
Which
that would
isn't
be,
out really, so.
which isn't out. So it would be, 10 years later still waiting for Arrow Lake or something. That would be a disaster.
Hmm. Yeah, what do you think about like Samsung acquiring them though? Because that one's interesting to me. Because if it could happen, their problem is nodes. Intel's got the nodes. Intel's problem is probably just management. Maybe Samsung has the management. Some quasi merger partnership that feels like they're a consortium. That seems like an interesting idea to me. Always has.
I think if you tie two turkeys together, what's that one that Android guy once said? If you tie two turkeys together, you're not going to get an eagle, right? So like I think Samsung's challenges, in my opinion, isn't technology, it's management. Like they have a management problem. Like they have a difficulty in understanding what's actually going on. There's a difficulty. First, there's not enough information going from the bottom to the top. And also, I think everyone's trying to cover their butt. And I also think that there's an insularity in Samsung that is that's a very Korean company thing. And I don't want to make presumptions, but like I've spoken to people who work with both companies, like as a supplier, and they say that like with Samsung, when you show up to a meeting, when a supplier shows up to a meeting with Samsung, Samsung's the one that's talking, right? They're the ones demanding things, right? And they don't take feedback back. And it's usually also just one guy. With TSMC, if you show up to a meeting with TSMC, they listen and they give feedback, and they're very smart. And it's more than just one person, it's a team. You see different teams. So I would imagine the challenges that Samsung is facing right now is a combination of management, resources, lack of money, and also like a cultural inability to diagnose real problems as they come along.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting insight there too, because it's funny. The second you brought management, I'm like, oh yeah, wait, this is like one of those mega companies in South Korea. If they're having issues, it's probably because they have management that hasn't had to really compete, right? And so, how is that really going to help Intel? That's actually a very good point. Alberto Molero and Dylan M write in and say, will there be a RISC-V renaissance where more people design chips without paying license fees? How far are we from RISC-V APUs? And what will be the advantages in the early days if RISC-V really does take off in competition like ARM is right now? To a degree, in consumer with x86, AI, battery life, cost, or will it just be the diversity of designs?
I think there'll probably be a cost benefit of some sort. I think it's a lot harder to challenge ARM than you might think, because ARM, just like TSMC, has been building an ecosystem of design IP, flexibility. Like they've been building this for 30 years or so. And I think asking an open source ecosystem to put in the resources with the time to overcome, they need to work much faster than ARM is, right? And ARM is a multi-billion-dollar company throwing all the resources that they have at it. So I think it's going to be extremely difficult for RISC-V to catch up. And that's, I hope that's not being controversial, but like,
not to me. Just because of how long it's taken ARM to compete in high performance markets, and when it does, it's like, I mean, look, Apple's doing well, but they're making massive 3 nanometer die. So of course, Apple silicon is competitive. Gee, good Lord, if it wasn't, that'd be crazy. But like, you can see like AMD and like, you've got Lunar Lake, they can match ARM efficiency. I mean, they are with x86. So I would, because I've seen this, I feel like I've seen this before. Yeah, I wouldn't just assume RISC-V is magically going to be more efficient all the time.
Just because it's open source, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are companies supporting RISC-V. I think the question is like, can they catch up? And those companies tend to be more like Alibaba or who else? Alibaba. A lot of Chinese companies out there. So I think maybe you'll see more diversity within the Chinese tech ecosystem, which, as we already discussed earlier, is quite formidable. So who knows?
Alberto Malero writes in yet again and says, is there anybody competing with ASML to build the semiconductor machines of the future?
Well, Canon and Nikon are still around. Nikon is still doing pretty good DUV machines, and Nikon has their, Canon has their nano imprint technology. Now, its nano imprint is nowhere near being ready for logic. It might be, if anything, it will probably be best done for memory. Like if you can, nano imprint's kind of like a stamp. They're stamping it rather than using light. So you'll probably get it more for memory. As for like
2 nanometer, and all that, like the most advanced silicon wafers.
Nah, it's gonna be ASML. That's gonna be ASML. I think that's
for the foreseeable future, maybe for decades.
Yeah, well, who else is gonna buy it? I mean, like if like TSMC's greatest dream, like their wet dream of wet dreams would be another company coming up like ASML being like, we have a litho machine that's just as good, just as productive, just as cheap, or just as flexible with your requirements, and it costs half the price. They would leap over the hills to make that happen. The question is, it's not possible. So it's like, and the market won't support it. So it's like, they're gonna, any other design has real downsides, right? Like I did a video about a while ago about the, a simplified 2-mirror EUV design, right? That, come up by a brilliant professor, I think in Japan. And, it's not, yes, it's a reduction in mirrors, which gives you better power output to the wafer. But at the same time, you have to make compromises in terms of what you can print as a design. And as a leading edge device, it's not quite ready for that. Like you can't print leading edge stuff. The best that he could position this for was as a design to EUVify older nodes, to EUVify nodes that aren't using EUV machines that aren't economical. So I think like that's going to be very difficult to, and you still need to have all the amazing mirrors. You need to have the amazing mechatronics. You need to do all of that. So in some cases, it's the ways to bring that, the ways to challenge that ecosystem is so difficult that you would have to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars. That doesn't quite make sense over the years, unless you're Huawei.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think there was anyone else catching up anytime soon, but I thought it was a valid question. The answer seems to be no. Gian Violi writes in, hi, Tom and Asianometry. What is the biggest challenge is to solve for advanced packaging to become cheaper? Are new nodes more expensive mostly because of advanced packaging requirements, or is it the higher density and increasing multi-patterning, or is it just because TSMC is charging more?
Ooh, good question. Advanced packaging is immature for now. There's a lot of things I think can definitely be improved. I think also one challenge is that I think like a lot of the equipment right now is probably not to the best situation. Like they're not most modern, they're not the best, but they are very cheap. So like I think that's probably the best way they're looking at it. Because no one thought advanced packaging 2 or 3 years ago, no one thought advanced packaging was going to be this huge deal. It was sort of this backwater, right? And now that you start seeing TSMC building advanced packaging fabs from the ground up with the idea that they need to tailor it for this problem, I think you're going to see a lot of improvement to make it cheaper. And also, I think like just because, I mean, it's there's still a lot more to do. It's still very young. And I don't think that is why the nodes are more expensive. I think the reason the nodes are more expensive is because stuff going on in the wafer, transistor-wise, energy-wise, more more complex-wise.
I mean, I've heard the newest nodes use an immense amount of energy. I mean,
huge. That means it's 20% more steps, which a lot of them are, which is, and then because it's a lot of this probably going to be a lot of EUV, it's going to be expensive light wise. It'll be, I mean, that I don't know if that $30,000 cost per wafer is real, but like
Mm.
it wouldn't absolutely surprise me because it's a lot of that's brand new tech that's being depreciated, but it'll go down over time. And I think that will become. I think people will start seeing that it's people will it'll get to a price. I think people will want to use it. TSMC wants people to use this stuff. They do.
Yeah, it's crazy seeing like, I remember from the gaming perspective, like the Theory X, like, ooh, they had HBM, and then Vega did, and then they said no more HBM for gamers after that. Too expensive. The second we don't need it, we're not going to use it. But it's all coming back. This advanced packaging and stuff. Like when you look at like Strix Halo, Lunar Lake, like all of these different APUs and products that are like, we want to package in really cutting edge ways everything to make it smaller, have the memory already on it, and it's starting to hit even some relatively mainstream devices that are using this advanced stuff. That right now it's expensive, but some of it's getting cheaper pretty quickly, which is crazy.
Yeah, I think people. TSMC is probably making too much money on advanced packaging. That probably needs to go down. I
Hmm.
think it will because everyone knows where the money's coming from, where that money is coming from. So I'm sure Jensen will work his magic to kind of squeeze that down soon.
Hmm. Carbon Cry writes in, what is the most undervalued, underexplored part of the semiconductor industry or the supply chain in the industry? Like last year, some ultra pure quartz came to fore. We also hear about new types of packaging, a buy only in the context of COWOS. What's next in your eyes?
Next as in like crisis, or next as in like this is the coolest, but no
I
one's
think it
paying
just means
attention.
what's underexplored, undervalued, or yes, not enough is paying attention to this next big thing.
Oh, without a doubt, it's photoresist. Like photoresist
Okay.
is like it's the like the spaghetti sauce you put on the wafer before you expose it.
Hmm.
And it's like it's so important because it receives the UV light. And you have to imagine you have to create this incredibly special molecule that receives maybe 1 bit of UV light and has to like do all these special things down the line to resist the etch, to resolve the image without any problems. And so these chemicals, these photoresists are extremely secret, and they tend to be, well, they're all monopolized by the Japanese, and the Japanese have been doing it for 30 years, and it's like another ASML. So
Hmm.
I think it's like really, you know, chemicals, people get bored, blah 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 blah. I get it, but it's like don't sleep on photoresist. It's a game changer.
All right. Final one here. I think it's a good one to end on. From maybe the person who submitted the most questions this time. Alberto Molero writes in yet again and says, what technologies would you, John, bet are going to be important in the next 5 to 10 years?
Hmm. I think I maybe I'll split it into like software and hardware. Software, obviously, AI, right? Like AI is
Sure.
going to be very important. It's going to change the world. Blah 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 blah. I think this hardware stuff is to be really interesting from the hardware side. I think like I've been really interested in drones technology. I think drones are probably going to be the next, or then they already are. They're very important, but I think a diffusion of drone technology away from China is
Mm,
going to be important for the rest of the world. And um, I think there's a lot of innovation in that area that people have not tapped, and I think maybe DJI is maybe kind of overshadowed. And I think if I could tell a bunch of kids, if I was in a
mm.
university talk or something, and the kids were saying, "What should I get into now?" I'd be like, "You should start playing with drones, and you should start doing stuff with drones because that stuff is always going to have value going down the line." Um, yeah, and I think it's a relatively early stage where you can get really cool stuff going, and you know there are already a lot of like stuff, especially with the robotics and drone robotics that are being shown in China that we should pay attention to and see as possibly a way to copy or kind of innovate on top of. And yeah, I would tell every person that I meet, every young person I meet, to go into drones, not AI. There's enough AI. Who cares about AI? I want drones. I want the bodies going forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I think just in general, like when you said more drone companies, I think just in general, and I've given this little spiel a few podcasts now over the past few months, but like I think people are underestimating like the democratization of like who's going to be competing. Like with the fall of Intel is going to come the rise of other CPU and GPU companies. And the same I think is going to happen in so many other places. Like, you know, people like, oh, Xbox isn't doing well. I think someone's going to replace them. I think someone's going to make that. I think in general, we're going to see more competition in a lot of markets right now. And I would agree that would include drones. And to add on to your drone thing, I mean, battery tech is getting, it's not that stupid thing you see on some science magazine where they're like, this Harvard tested a battery 10,000 times better. It'll be ready in 2 years. You see that every 2 months. It never happens. But it is getting 10, 20% better every year. And exponentially, it's getting to this place where like, I just think like where we look at these like goofy little robot vacuums that bump into walls and vacuum everything. What if we get the battery tech just good enough where we have a drone this big that has a charging dock, takes off and just does little things around the house for you? Like,
but is that battery tech getting better outside of China or within China?
I think it's getting better everywhere from what I can tell. But yes, China's cutting on the cutting edge. But you know, Tesla's they say has the best battery tech as well. And I just think like, yeah, if you get to this place where like the AI and they actually build the hardware that can do things effectively, like who's to say we couldn't have like a companion to that little robot vacuum? You get look at it, maybe it only has 10 minutes of flight time. Doesn't matter. It can return to the dock and it just gets up, organizes your mail, like goes around your house, dusts a thing, and it's just getting up and going every 10 minutes to do things around the house for you. That's going to fundamentally change how we do things, how many chores we have to do, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I think one of the underrated stories of the past years is just like the enablement of new consumer technologies by batteries. And the fact that all of these batteries are now made, the best batteries are in China, barring Tesla, of course, has enabled so much new cool electronics that are made in China, not in the United States. And a lot of that,
well, like earbuds, like look at the batteries we can fit in something in your ear, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, I think there's people need to be working on, I think more people need to be working on that. And I think, you know, America can do some industrial policy to get that going. If they,
the battery problem, yeah, that seems more solvable with brute force. In other words, writing a lot of checks than it would be to build up an entire manufacturing supply base. Just make batteries. We could, you know, that seems a little easier to do.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end this episode on, John. I want to thank you again so much for coming on. But, you know, before we let you go, please tell everybody where they can find you and plug as many things as you want.
You know, I'm Asianometry on YouTube. Like that's where it all comes from. So just go to the YouTube channel and check it out. And very excited to keep working on videos. It's almost coming on to 9 years now, so it's been a long time. But it'll be fun, and I'm still doing at it.
And of course, we'll have links to Asianometry in the description as well. And yep, I will also shill. Please make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law Z YouTube channel. Ring the bell button, comment below, share the podcast, subscribe to the podcast at your podcast app of choice, and give us a review on Apple Podcasts as well, so that other people can find us outside of YouTube. And then, of course, consider joining the Moore's Law Z Patreon to get access to bonus content like Die Shrink, Ask Us Questions, free questions in the live stream, access to the Discord. There's actually quite a lot there. I think I need to advertise the Patreon more. So please check that out. And otherwise, again, John, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for watching, everybody, and have a good week. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About / support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Mellon, Drita Full, Z Jits, Daniel D, Dink, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, MJB1, GZ Ziggy, SNES Chalmers, Toka, Jerem Ferriera, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregor Sacker, Sarcastro, Chris Trick, Evan Dingle, Compressed AI Blocks, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Samuel Loss, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Chrysantine, Jonathan, Franco Frederic, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Slicky, Nithra Zink, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zoot Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Jamie Witters, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Aisha, James Anderson, Mark Raidmaker, Cole Adda, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Maisha Rona, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Win Wang, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I, Raider, Little Germany, Shay, JSMMH, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, McDaffie, Stephen Dick, Justin Bustle, Austin Haggerty, Jofit, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushby, Himsa Gung, Tails 2299, Mio Val, Vega, Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, Brian Wright, RB Racer, Alex Vega, Dr. J Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Jeffrey Gentleman, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Kikum, Solarized 80, Thalo 215, Matthew Marlowe, Brian P, Sprutnik, Hudat 42, Coinster 671, Pento went to Hell, Richard, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John Wick, Boobsick Porcelain, Oats Creaking 3, Nick Zuzmania, Sakosha, State Farm Snake, Rai Chi Bowles, Kevin Kuntz, and Stope, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.